Hi everyone, welcome to the January 19th edition of the TimeformUS forecast. I'm David Aragona. My usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, unfortunately unable to join me this week. He had something come up early in the week, so won't be with me for this week's podcast. We actually did not put out a pacecast this week, but we did want to put out a forecast handicapping Fairgrounds this upcoming weekend, and happy to have a guest that has plenty of in-depth knowledge about that New Orleans track that we've had on the podcast before. My DRF colleague Marcus Hersh is going to help me handicap the late pick 5 sequence at Fairgrounds on Saturday. That, of course, features that grade 3 Lecomte, that early prep for the Kentucky Derby. And we always look forward to the start of these Kentucky Derby preps in the month of January when these 3-year-olds have turned a year older. We'll be starting that quest, that march towards the Kentucky Derby in the first Saturday in May. But there's plenty more to look forward to in the rest of January, including next week when the Pegasus World Cup takes place at Gulfstream Park. And speaking of the Pegasus World Cup, you should be aware that horse racing's most player-friendly handicapping tournament, the Pegasus World Cup Betting Championship, is back on Saturday, January 27th. What makes it so great? Most importantly, first is seeding the prize pool with $50,000 of their own cash, and of your $6,000 buy-in, $5,000 is your live tournament bankroll, and just $1,000 goes to the prizes. That means you have more money at your disposal to rocket to the top of the leaderboard, and at 200 players, you're looking at a $250,000 prize pool. And the prizes themselves stand alone. We're talking huge stacks of cash, plus BCBC seats, NHC seats, and seats to the new and improved Ultimate Betting Challenge. Plus, you can play in the Pegasus World Cup Betting Championship online at ExpressBet or on track at Gulfstream or Santa Anita. Think you have what it takes? Head over to pwcbc.com for registration and more information. So let's bring in this week's guest. It is my DRF colleague, Marcus Hersh, who has plenty of experience handicapping Fairgrounds at this time of year, so we can get some insight from him as we go through this pick 5 sequence. And Marcus, it feels like this might be some of the only racing that's happening around the country on Saturday, because so much weather predicted, or bad weather, I should say, in many areas, but feels like we're going to be okay with this Fairgrounds card.
Yeah, it'll be fine. They might not train as like regularly Saturday morning because it's going to be below freezing, but there's no precipitation, and it's supposed to be a high of 44. So it should be fast and firm, and no issue with the card going forward.
Well, that's good to hear, and I'm always glad that you're able to come on to talk about some of these cards that we have in the wintertime, because we typically get some nice horses appearing in these stakes races, the Lecomte, Risen Star, and Louisiana Derby cards, and it feels like that's the case this year. We've got some notable names, particularly at the Louisiana Stakes, as part of the sequence. We'll get to that a little bit later in the Pick 5 sequence, but before we get into the handicap, I just kind of wanted to ask you, as somebody who's following the Fairgrounds day in and day out, I know at this time last year we were having very different conversations about track profiles, especially with regard to the turf course and all the issues they had last season. This season, I know it's a totally different story. Have you noticed any trends, whether it be on the dirt or the turf, that we should be taking note of?
I have, and especially the day we're recording Thursday. Well, the main track is basically for the last couple of weeks been faster than any time I can remember it in the 20-some years I've been covering Fairgrounds. Like on today's card, Louisiana bred $10,000 main claimers, basically the lowest level horses at the track. The leader went 21 and change, 45 and change, which I've never seen at that class level. It seems almost impossible. And not only that, won by like 6 lengths. There's a big speed bias Thursday. The track has been kind of trending that way in a lot of respects, I think. I don't know if that will persist through the weekend, but it definitely, like through the first half of the Thursday card specifically, and more generally in the recent racing, forward placements have been fairly essential on dirt. The turf course, as you mentioned, good shape. The historical bias at Fairgrounds has been toward closers. That is not at all the case. Front runners are doing just fine, regardless of where the rail has been positioned. The temporary rail does come down this week, so they're going to run at the true distances. It'll be at the 0 position for Saturday's card. I wouldn't be looking for the track profile to influence the turf outcomes.
That's good information. I know we were seeing horses run down the outside rail at this time of year at the fairgrounds last year on the turf, but glad that we have many more running lanes to deal with this year. And that's good information about the rails going down to 0 feet. I know sometimes we feel like the inside is the place to be during those times when the rail first comes down, but sometimes I think handicappers make too much of that and just play fairly. So I think we'll get some insight into that from the early races. And you do always want to pay attention to when those track profiles on the dirt change, especially when the speed of the track changes. It can usually mean that the track is playing differently. So great notes about those impressions from early in the week. Well, we're going to get into the handicapping this late pick 5 sequence. It is races 9 through 13 at Fairgrounds on Saturday. All stakes races, beginning with the Marie Krantz Memorial, running on through the Silver Bullet Day, Colonel E.R. Bradley, and then the 2 grade 3s at the end of the card, the Louisiana Stakes, and that early Kentucky Derby prep, the grade 3 Lecomte. Well, let's begin with the turf race that kicks off the sequence, the 9th of the Marie Krantz Memorial. It is a mile and a 16th for the fillies and mares. And Marcus, I want to get your insight on the number 9, Tufani, because she feels like very much the horse to beat when you watch her races. She's got this big late kick. Her speed figures don't necessarily make her any kind of standout in this race, but she is the kind of horse where it feels like you might want to pay more attention to the visual impression that she leaves.
Oh, 100% agree with that. And I would also pay attention to her final quarter mile time in the Pago Hop, December 30th, 22:91. I mean, I'm not going to be totally married to that as being completely representative. But I think, even accounting for whatever, she flew home. I think she's better than her speed figures personally. She was showing a lot of signs over the summer. She kind of took a little step back probably in the Virginia Oaks on September 9th, just maybe wasn't quite ready for it. Maybe it had gone a little over the top, but she's thrived at fairgrounds. It's 3 weeks back. Michael Stinham would tend to wait a little longer to run horses back, but I did talk to the assistant trainer, Hillary Pridham, about this horse, and she said that Tufani has been in roaring form since the Pago Hop. She's the horse with, right now, she seems most talented. I think she's only going to get better. And to me, she's maybe the solidest horse in this whole sequence.
Yeah, it feels like since they figured out how to get the best out of her in these last couple of races, which might be due to changing up her running style a bit, they just really hold her up at the back of the pack, and she just unleashes this powerful finish, as you were saying, through the lane. I mean, at the top of the stretch in each of the last 2 races, it didn't seem like she was going to have enough time to get there. And then in the blink of an eye, she's in position to inhale the leaders. So really impressive turn of foot from her. I guess you might want to be a little bit concerned about the pace situation in this race because it doesn't feel like there's a ton of speed in here, but you've got a horse in the number 3, Swoonatra, who doesn't seem like a legitimate contender who's going to be setting the pace. So sometimes when you've got an uncompetitive horse leading the field early, it just brings the closers into the race when that one inevitably comes back. So we'll see how that plays out for Tufani, because it does feel like from this outside post, they're just going to take her to the back of the pack and hope that stretch kick is enough to bail her out.
Yeah, I think that Swoonatra will suck some of the pressers and stalkers into a decent pace. Like this horse, Unbridled Mary, who has mainly sprinted in her career. I know she was off a moderate dirt pace, but she's not even a dirt horse. I think she'll be close. I don't think it's a deep race at all. I don't see, none of these horses strike me as I don't see any sneaky contenders. Fancy Martini, maybe off the Diodoro claim. She was well beaten in this race last year. I don't think that she's good enough. And I liked Creative Cairo in the Blushing KD, and she lost a head bob to Lovely Princess. I think that was more an indictment of Lovely Princess's current form than a suggestion that Creative Cairo is some horse with huge upside. She's a 6-year-old. I think that's about as good as she can do. Lovely Princess has been going without a break forever and has not been as good in her last couple races. She's a horse to me, I'm totally against her. She's the opposite of Tufani, a horse who's on the rise. So I don't know. It's kind of a clear choice for me.
Yeah, I definitely feel where you're going here. I mean, Lovely Princess is the kind of horse that on paper, she looks almost like the horse to beat based on those series of speed figures. But
Exactly.
when you go and watch her races, they're just a little underwhelming. She's gotten her fair share of good trips, especially in that Blushing KD last time. I mean, the path opened to the top of the stretch and she couldn't help but win that race. So I agree. She's not for me. I was intrigued by the horse that you mentioned as one that could be a pace presser in here, the number 7, Unbridled Mary, because they've only gone long with her on the turf one time, and that was that California bred race on October 9th of last year, and she was chasing that rocket ship out there, Hamwood Flyer, who's just a runoff in the early stages. And she was in that really difficult position where she's sort of 5 lengths behind a runoff leader and 5 lengths in front of the rest of the field in the backstretch. And she actually did okay to hold on for third in that race, in a race where the speed completely collapsed. I thought that based on the evidence of that race, it's not unclear. I mean, it's not clear that she can't handle the distance. And what you were saying, the fact that she was as competitive as she was in a dirt route last time, it gives some confidence that maybe routing on turf is going to be okay for her. Can she deal with the late kick of a horse like Tufani if that one shows up? I don't know, but I feel like she's going to be a much better price. So she's kind of the one horse that I could latch onto as an alternative.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I'd prefer her at the respective odds, certainly to her stablemate, Lovely Princess.
Well, it sounds like we're pretty much in agreement in the Marie Krantz, slightly different horses that we might use as A's or B's and C's in that race if we look at it that way. But let's move on to the next leg, back to the dirt course, race 10, the Silver Bullet Day. This one for the 3-year-old filly is going the distance of 1 mile and 70 yards. And some horses in here that I'm interested to get your take on, because we've got a Brad Cox trainee in West Omaha who I would assume is going to go favorite. These types of horses just seem to suck in the money when Cox sends them out in these 3-year-old stakes races. And she's run pretty well in all 3 of her starts, but she does have sort of an odd running action. I mean, she carries her head very high, and it almost looks like she's climbing in the early stages of her races, but that's just the way that she runs.
Yeah, absolutely. She's a high-headed horse, and she's skinny and tall and she's got a big stride. She hits the ground hard. I don't love the way she goes at all. But this race, man, I don't know. It's just there's not much to it as far as I can see. You know, I thought she was kind of green in the untappable, in that she lost position at a key juncture, right around the half-mile pole going into the turn, which was not a good thing since her stablemate Alpine Princess was on an easy lead. I mean, to me, it was surprising that it was Alpine Princess rather than West Omaha on the lead in the untappable. But I don't know. Take that for in any way you want. I just think that she was. I knew as soon as the race ended that they were going to sit this race out with Alpine Princess, and that this would be West Omaha's turn. And she certainly landed in the right spot. I mean, I ended up taking against her because I'm a little bit interested in Miss Code West, but she's not going to be a huge price either. And I don't know. We'll see how good she is. I couldn't really get behind like any of the other horses in the race, and I'm not going to be surprised if West Omaha just wins at like 7-5.
Yeah, I have trouble being too against a horse like her because, as you were saying, I mean, she's showed up in her last couple of races, and I wonder if they're going to change up the running style here, because she seemed way more comfortable setting the pace 2 back, and maybe she's not fast enough to make the lead over horses with sprint speed like Play Good, Pay Good or Ma Ray's Girl. We'll see how that all plays out, but I wonder if the rider switch to Luis Saez is maybe a clue that they're going to try to be a little bit more aggressive with her, because I agree with what you were saying. Watching the last race, kind of taking even a little bit of kickback, moving around the clubhouse turn or racing down the backstretch, she seemed to be disengaging a little bit and really have to get after her to continue trying through the lane. And Luis Saez is kind of one of those riders that keeps pedaling on a horse. So maybe he'll be a better fit for her. We'll see about that. I don't know how short a price I want to take on her, but I kind of agree that I would expect her to show up and run a decent race. But Miss Code West, usually my inclination is to be skeptical of horses like this coming in from Remington Park and beating up on highly suspect competition. But
those were poor horses in the Oklahoma bred races, no doubt about it.
Yeah, but going and pulling up the replays of her last 2 mile races, I mean, she's a pretty robust daughter of Code West, and she looks like one that definitely wants every bit of this distance. And the way that she's finished these races and the speed figures that she's earned, she might fit with this group.
I feel the same way. I'd even go back to her first race, which was 5/8, and I think we can see that was too short for her. She's been so professional from the start. She was in a lot of traffic and had to weave between horses and make a sustained run. It was a lot to ask for a first-time starter. She did it very nicely. I don't know how much the muddy track and the trapeze moved her up, but it was clearly her best race, and she was eased down the last several strides because that race was over well before the wire. The TX Women for Arts is probably a cut below the West Omaha level of horse, but she just disposed of her easily. I kind of really thought I saw her extending herself more in that race. Like she's growing up and figuring out how to use her body better. She got a little break after that. I talked to the trainer today, who's never had a horse this good. They weren't exactly sure what they were going to do, but she got back on the work tab January 7th. She popped a bullet at Houston. Can't pull that work up. So I don't know how she worked, but I think she's pretty live. I don't think she's going to be 9-2. I think she's going to be the solid second choice in here, maybe 7-2 ish. But at that price and what I expect West Omaha to be, and what I see as the potential upside for Miss Code West, I just sided with her.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in her. I will also be intrigued about what price she actually goes off at, because I could see her pulling in some support, because those last couple of replays, they are visually impressive. But when I'm looking at horses like this coming in from lesser circuits, I'm really just looking at physicality. Are they going to match up against the competition that they're facing in this tougher spot? And she's one where it feels like she kind of passes that test. So we'll see if she's actually able to do it on the racetrack. I was trying to make a case, and I'm kind of on the fence about how much I'd want to lean on her here for the number 1 Perfect Shot, because Steve Asmussen can at times be one of these trainers that will just race these horses into fitness, and they'll keep getting better from start 2 to start 3 and start 3 to start 4. We're going to talk about one of those later in the card that definitely fits that pattern. She's had a couple months since she broke her maiden at Churchill Downs at the end of November, so there's the possibility for further development during that time. She's definitely got the pedigree that says that she's supposed to continue improving with the added distance, and I liked the way she handled the 2-turn test last time. I wish that there had been a little more quality in some of the maiden races that she was exiting, but I don't want to get too caught up in that, because I'm not sure how strong the competition has been for any of these fillies.
That's a good point. And I don't know. I was a little bit interested in her because I thought she showed some spark in the win, but I don't know that there's that much more to her. I feel like they're kind of passing the 1X because they knew this race was coming up super light and are hoping to get a stakes placing while they can. I ended up coming down on the side of she doesn't have that much upside. Could be wrong. And to me, she's the horse to me that you could consider in that sort of light among all the others. I don't see it from anyone else. I'm thinking that it's not going to happen, but if it were to with any of these fillies, it would probably be from this one.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to take 3-1 on her, but she feels like one. If West Omaha takes a lot of money, maybe she could drift up into that 5-1 range. And for me, that would probably be good enough on her. But we'll see how the prices shake out in this race. Just kind of trying to find some alternative to West Omaha, because I expect her to run well. I also don't want to take a super short price on a horse that looks like she can be a little bit quirky.
Yeah, to me, in the pick 5. I'm just using Miss Code West and West Omaha, and I can't toss West Omaha because I think she's meant to win this race. Her quirks aside, and she just might be a better horse inherently than the Oki bred.
Yeah, that's. I think there might be something to that. Let's move on to the 11th race. And I think things start to get a little trickier from a wagering standpoint as we move on to the next 2 races in this sequence. The Colonel E.R. Bradley is race 11, mile and a 16th on the turf course. obviously, Marcus, handicapping this race, you kind of feel the loss of two Emmys who typically runs in these races, and you had to watch the replay of the Diliberto Memorial where he smashed all these horses, and just unfortunate to not have a horse like that able to finish out his career.
Yeah, and it was kind of an injury he didn't break down. He was hurt by a horse that ran into him. And Hugh Robertson, the owner and the trainer, is one of my favorite people in racing. And I felt, even though I don't spend any time around this horse, I felt an attachment to him. It was pretty heartbreaking.
No, yeah, I know he was a horse you had a real affinity for.
I did. Racing goes on, and I don't know. Do you not think that Strong Quality is just getting loose and leading all the way in this race?
Well, I guess I have a question for you. I mean, I know you're kind of in tune with a lot of the horses that are going to be scratching out of some of these races. Is Brigadier General not running here? I mean, it looks like a horse that was meant for dirt.
Yeah, I didn't reach the trainer, but I can't. I think he was only in it for the rain off, which is not going to happen. Cross entered in the 5th season, which is canceled, but I think postponed is the better word. I would imagine that he is not running. I just don't think he's a grass horse, and I think they'll wait for the dirt spot. And without him, I don't see who runs with Strong Quality. And while Strong Quality showed that he's not quite up to, he may not want to go all of a mile and a quarter anyway. But running, he was definitely overmatched by Up to the Mark in the Manhattan, and I thought the Million was an ambitious spot for him as well. And then I never hold a race that seems a little below the best for a horse against that horse if it came at Kentucky Downs. I'm not sure that was the course for him. So I go back to I thought he was pretty encouraging against lesser horses in his first 2 grass races, and with a pace advantage, 3rd start of the form cycle. He's been based at Fairgrounds since late November. If he does shake loose the way I think he's going to, I don't see him getting run down.
Yeah, I really wasn't sure how to regard him in this race. The more I thought about him and looked at him, the less that I liked him. I mean, he's a horse that I would almost want to see going a lot longer than this on the turf. I know they've kind of topped out at a mile and a quarter, and he just was not up to facing the competition in the Arlington Million and the Manhattan. But I mean, to me, he feels like one of these grinding horses with no turn of foot at all that just wants to, run his competition into the ground. And maybe he gets to do that in this race, but I worry about horses like this that just seem like they have no acceleration. They just run along at one pace. The races that he was successful in when he first got on the turf, he got very favorable setups in those races. And I get that he was somewhat against it in the Manhattan, which featured a faster pace, and the Arlington Million. But the race at Kentucky Downs, it bothers me a little bit. I thought he was supposed to show a little more punch through the stretch. And I wonder if he's one of those horses when he takes a challenge on the turf, he just can't quite kick with the others.
Oh, yeah, he doesn't have a kick. He doesn't have a kick. But also I thought they ran him back too quick in the tap it at Kentucky Downs. It was pretty short turnaround in the heat of the summer. I definitely see what you're saying. I've seen enough races this meet where if the front runner can open up an upper stretch, it's tough to kick them down. And I don't know. I'm interested to hear who your candidates are to run this horse down. Because I'm not sure that I really have any. The horse that I thought, the other one that I strongly considered was Rising Empire, who was just awful in the Diliberto, like almost too bad to be true. But if he runs back to his Muniz and sits second, he could be a horse that he could be the right one to get first run and to have a little bit better punch than.
Well, I wanted to ask you about him because I wonder what they're going to do with him in this race, because he's got these 2 races at his past performances where they went to the lead on the turf that are far and away the best efforts on the surface that he's produced. And he's got a bunch of other races where he just sits back in mid-pack at his one pace and doesn't pass anybody. So did the connections feel by putting Luis Saez on here that they have to be more aggressive than they were last time and try to get him to the front? I don't think he's quick enough to outrun a horse like Strong Quality.
He's not, and he went too fast last time. I think that hurt him to some extent. I mean, those races where he led, you can see there was no pace at all.
Yes,
I would point to the race before the Muniz as something like he sat mid-pack. It was obviously there was lesser competition. I think he'd be a horse that would be fine tracking a loose leader. I don't know why he was so terrible last time, but I mean, that is going to help his price here for sure.
I've got a couple of horses that I have ideas about. You might think I'm crazy in this race because if I'm against strong quality, I think this is a race where you can get a little bit creative because you've got a lot of horses where the division is opened up without the presence of two Emmys.
That's right. And Beatbox at a short price is not one that I really want to get attached to either.
I would agree with that. He's a horse that I would anticipate is going to take some money. I mean, he looks pretty good on speed figures. Watching his races, he doesn't do a ton for me, though I recognize he can obviously win this race. Maybe this race just doesn't come apart enough for him, but what do you make of the 6 Who Took the Money, who's the Louisiana bred coming in for this race? I mean, he's actually, I know that it seems like a huge jump up in class, but he's actually faced some decent horses, as I'm sure you know. That's a strong division of Louisiana bred older horses right now. He probably has seen some better days, and
that's my problem.
Started to drop a little too far back in his races, which might really put him up against it from a running style standpoint.
If this would have been 2 seasons ago, I would probably have liked him to win the race. When this horse first started running on turf, he had at Fairgrounds, when he won the Champions Day Turf in 2021, he had an absolutely flaming kick. He really finished like, not just for a lawbred, like I thought he was an open company horse, but I don't see it from him anymore. You know, he ran okay last time against a horse who's pretty good, Behemoth Star. But to me, he didn't look like the horse he was 4 or going into 5. I mean, they've run him on dirt too many times. I think it hasn't helped his ability to keep it together into a 6-year-old season. And I can't see him getting it done unless he can, bring back his glory days.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching his races even from the end of last winter. I'm starting to believe a little bit, but you watch the last turf race and he was just, he as you were saying, he lacked a little bit of that kick. It felt like an old version of him would have run down that horse, even somewhat against the pace as he was. So I was trying to make him, I feel like I couldn't quite get there. I ended up being most interested in the number 4, Duke of Carthania. And he's kind of a weirdo horse in this race.
Yeah.
Obviously, he lost the rider last time. I mean, I don't know if you have an opinion on this, Marcus, but I thought he was actually going to do something in that race when I was watching the replay. Yes, he got a good ground-saving trip, and I think you have to take that into account when you consider where he was at the point that the incident occurred. But he was moving in tandem with Beatbox and seemingly hadn't even come off the bridle as quickly as that one did. Obviously ran into some trouble, clipped heels, and it was over after that, losing the rider. But I go back to his race 2 back as maybe some evidence that we're dealing with a different horse than we had ever seen from him before. I mean, he was running in that off the turf race against Starter Allowance Company, obviously not up to this level, but you have to consider this is a horse who had never done anything on the dirt before. I mean, he had never run even close to that good on the dirt. And you go back and watch that race, he again traveled into that race so strongly, never coming off the bridle until the very end. And he probably only did because he's just not a dirt horse. I mean, I know he was a gigantic price last time. Who knows if he would have hit the board or not? But I get the sense that this horse has, for whatever reason, has significantly improved in the last couple of months. And it might not be so apparent looking at his form just on paper. So he's going to be a price in this race. And I feel like he's one that I have to really upgrade.
Well, I think Fairgrounds is his course. He showed flashes early in his career and he never really developed. But I mean, okay. Yeah. I mean, if you're not a believer in, well, there are a lot of horses not to be believers in. And then once you start digging into it, like, are you really going to get behind a Protonic Power? Or, I mean, I can definitely see digging as far down as you can in this race. I think this race, if you're right about strong quality, has a chance to blow things up.
Yeah, and I might be wrong about strong quality, but I feel like he's going to be a pretty short price. And
he's the favorite here.
Down off that 3-1 morning line.
Yeah, he's the favorite to me.
Yeah. So for me, it's just a value-based opinion on a horse that I'm pretty confident is going to be somewhere near that 20-1. So I'll try to do something with him. And I could use horses like Beatbox somewhere. I could even use strong quality with some of my other opinions and surrounding legs. But Duke of Carthania feels like a horse that I would want to key on in this race.
Nice.
Let's move on to the Louisiana Stakes, and we've got a smaller field here. I think I saw you report that we're likely to have one scratch out of this race of Capuna. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, I mean, smaller field, but I still feel like we've got some difficult questions to answer on this one, particularly around the two morning line favorites. You probably are going to be the solid betting favorites in the number 2 Smile Happy and the number 3 Saudi Crown. Both at their best are far and away superior to this field. Which one is the better horse between the two of them? I think you could have a good debate about that. But I think first we have to answer the question, which one do we trust to show up more on the day? Because they're both coming off poor efforts for different reasons. Saudi Crown chasing that fast pace in the Breeders' Cup Classic, going a distance that I think we would agree is just too far for him. And Smile Happy, I mean, I recall some of the antics that he was exhibiting on the track before the Stephen Foster, a bad sign. I remember just watching his price drift up in the minutes before that race as I think bettors were being scared off by what he was doing and the way he was behaving. And now we haven't seen him since then, putting forth a subpar effort that day. These are both good horses. I'm just not sure quite how to regard them in this spot.
Yeah, when I wrote up this race for the Racing Forum, that is exactly the approach that I took. Because I definitely don't think that either one of them has to win. I mean, I don't know. I've always thought that Smile Happy was an absolutely elite talent, which doesn't show up in his form except in the Ali Sheba, where you have to remember that was a race he ran out of his own stall, which has in the past made a huge difference for this horse. He shipped to Ellis Park for the Foster. And what he did in that race before the race is he basically refused to go forward, which is something he's done. I remember talking to the trainer, Kenny McPeak, before his Oaklawn comeback in March 2023. And he said the horse has been tricky to train. Sometimes he just stops and he won't go forward and you can't train him. That's not a great sign.
No.
Not just for just because it suggests that he's not focused on being a racehorse and he's not willing to, exceed to the demands of what humans are asking of him. And it just makes him hard to trust. At his best, I would take him over Saudi Crown. I can't have him here. I mean, if he wins, he wins. And, great. I hope he has a really good campaign and all that natural talent is able to be expressed during the season. Saudi Crown, you also have to keep in mind two key things to me. One is this is a $175,000 race that's a prep for a $20 million race next month. And I think it's pretty easy to figure out that they're not aiming for this. They want to get a good solid race into him. And complicating matters is he's a one-way speed horse in 2-turn races. And he's drawn inside this horse, 5-Star General, who's just very, very fast in routes and is not going to let him get away. And I just think that's how it's going to shake out. If he's fit enough and he can shake off 5-Star General early enough, or if they take back and try to come around, maybe he gets it done. But at his price, I'm not willing to bet that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the inclination is to trust Saudi Crown a little bit more because the Breeders' Cup excuse is one that, we give on a consistent basis to a lot of horses. Wrong distance, fast pace, he's likely to go back to his prior races. I think looking at some of his form from the middle of last year, you can question some of those races in retrospect, like, finishing in the photo with Fort Bragg, even being, that Jim Dandy, finishing between Forte and Angel Empire. Disarm was also in that race, but I think you can question how strong that really was, especially considering he had everything go his way. I did think his Pennsylvania Derby was good. And looking back through the also-rans from that field, they've come back to at least validate the performance and have done some good things out of that race. So I think Saudi Crown's legitimate.
He's a good horse. He's a one-turn miler at heart, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the mile and the 16th of this race, it might be just fine for him. But I think using it as a prep is something that you should be aware of when handicapping this race. And as for Smile Happy, I have a question that maybe you can answer. I assume he's not running out of his stall in this race, but I'll admit I don't know what that training center he's been working at is. Do you know where that is?
That's in Florida. That's McPeak's own farm.
Okay.
And so he's he's shipping after his last work, so he's shipping kind of on top of the race. He hasn't been at Fairgrounds. He was there several days in advance of the Risen Star. I remember watching him gallop. It was one of the best gallops I've ever seen. Too bad he didn't run back to it in the race. But anyway, I mean, what are you going to do with him?
So, I mean, it sounds like we both think that the two favorites are somewhat vulnerable. Probably the two most likely winners, more than probably. But there are other places to go in this race. Who were you looking at as a potential upsetter if you think there can be one?
I picked Happy American to win. And I don't know. I mean, at first, I thought the horse was kind of toast because he came back from this Foster to the Lucas Classic and hasn't looked like the same horse. But going back over things, that might not be the case. And at his best, well, he won this race last year with a 98 buyer, which is going to put him in contention. And then his third in the Stephen Foster also, was a good enough race that you could see him breaking through again. He was so far behind in the Lucas Classic, it was kind of mind-boggling. And then in the Fayette, where he ran dreadfully, he was, I mean, he's a one-run closer. He's going to sit in last, and you want to let him go with a quarter mile to run and just hope that he gets there. But he was allowed to move up wide on the backstretch and was only a couple lengths off the lead while 4 wide going into the far turn. I mean, for a horse like this, that's just never going to work. I don't really hold that race against him. And then I found out today, while talking to the trainer, Neil Pessin, he had been thinking about the Clark back at Churchill in November. The horse got a little sick twice, and he only had 2 works into the Tenacious, which was 2 months after his Fayette. And the track on that December 23rd card, I think you could make a case that as the day wore on, and maybe even subtly earlier, I mean, there were only 2 closing winners all day. They were both Brad Cox maidens, and 5-Star General ran a race that certainly looked like the track helped him. This horse, his half mile from the 3/4 to the quarter was so much faster than anyone else's in the race, and he moved a little bit early on the far turn. It looked like he could win at the top of the stretch and then flattened out. Between his interrupted schedule and the potential for a bias, that was a better effort than it seemed. And if they do go fast enough here, I think he could get back to a level that's good enough to post an upset.
I like it because, I mean, when I was handicapping this race, I was kind of first going in that direction of just thinking that his recent form has not been the same, and he's maybe a horse that was past his prime. But if there are excuses, and if we view that last race as maybe a bit more of a positive than it looks at first glance, potentially he can get back to being good enough to win a race like this. I mean, he is the defending champion in this Louisiana Stakes, although it feels like this is a much tougher edition of the race than the one that he won last year. But he is that kind of horse. He's got that big far turn move when he's on and when he's feeling himself. I mean, that's when he starts moving about the 3/8 pole. And we'll see if he can get into contention at the top of the stretch. He probably has a little more upside. It might not be the right word, but he's got a higher ceiling, I guess.
On the day,
a horse like Red Route 1, who's a similar running style.
Yeah, so, I don't like him in this spot. I talked to the trainer, and they're aiming for some big money races at 1 1/8 miles. I think he's much better at 1 1/8 miles and with a fast pace. 1 1/8 miles, he can get into the frame against better horses. I don't think he's going to run his best race here.
Yeah, I found myself trying to get creative in this race as well, and maybe I'm trying to get too creative with the horse that I'm leaning towards here. But watching back that Tenacious, I was a little puzzled by the trip that Confidence Game got. I get that they were trying to experiment with rating tactics again, because this horse sort of was too aggressive, too back, being ridden into the race inside of other speeds, and just got really tired at the end. That was just a second start off the layoff, and he clearly is just racing back into fitness right now. But last time, I don't know exactly what was going on around the far turn while Happy American was making that blitz around the field. This horse looked like he got a little shuffled back, and then it just felt like James Graham sort of got out of sync with the horse almost. He was just sort of bouncing up and down in the stirrups, and just this horse was not moving smoothly underneath him, or at least not in tandem with the rider. And then in the last eighth of a mile, it's like he finally leveled out and was actually running fastest of all through the finish line and galloped out best of anybody in the field. So I thought that was a slightly better race than maybe it looks on paper. The big question for him is his ceiling high enough to compete with some of these horses? And I'll admit I don't know, but there is a rider switch in this race to Corey Lanerie, and sometimes just a new rider on a horse that can be a little quirky can be a benefit. And I would imagine he's going to sit a pretty good trip here because he's kind of the obvious stalker in a race where you've got Saudi Crown and 5-Star General to go out and sort each other out, sort the two of their running styles out on the lead. And we'll see if he's good enough. I think he's finally going to be a much more bettable price, whereas he's sort of money on reputation as prior races.
He was the favorite last time. Good Lord.
Yeah, it's a little puzzling in retrospect, especially considering some of the form that 5-Star General had been in, but that's a red board. I just feel like he's going to be the right price, and I saw enough in his last race to suggest that was a subtle step forward for him, and he is a horse that has that back class. So,
how much back class does he have, though? I mean, to me, he's got one outlier race in the Rebel over a sloppy track that suggests that he's actually a good horse. I haven't seen much in any of his other starts that tells me that he is.
I will say I thought his Kentucky Derby was a deceptively good race. He was
close to the pace,
on his pace, and was in it for a long way. He ran a lot better in that race than I was expecting him to. I'll put it that way. But you're right. I mean, based on results, he is kind of a one hit wonder horse. But I feel
that being said, I can't say that you're wrong. I mean, 5-Star General is the wrong horse because he's going to be the one pushing Saudi Crown. I already expressed my disinterest in Red Route 1. The horse that I was touting may just be completely over the top. And then it's like, who are you left with?
And maybe at that point, you're just supposed to go back to the favorites because you're having trouble making the case for everybody else. And sometimes you just have to throw your hands up and say, well, this just is not an appealing betting race. But it's part of this pick 5 sequence, and you sort of have to force yourself into an opinion if you're going to play it, and especially if you have good opinions in the other races. So for me, Confidence Game is not the kind of horse I'd want to lean on in here because I'm not totally convinced that he's good enough, but I would want to use him either as a B behind the two favorites or maybe an equal strength with them. We'll see how expensive my ticket starts to get and whether or not that's feasible. But of all the prices, he's the one that I would want to upgrade. And I'm guessing you feel pretty much the same way about Happy American.
Similar. Yeah, absolutely. Similar situation.
Well, let's finish out this sequence by discussing what I guess is the feature race on the card with so much attention on Derby preps at this time of year. The Grade 3 Lecomte, this one offering 20 Kentucky Derby qualifying points to the winner of this race. 1.16 the distance. And there are some interesting horses in here, Marcus, but as I was going through it again and again, it does kind of feel like it comes down to the two from Gun Runner, in Nash, and Track Phantom. That just feels like it was a really strong race, and I'm not sure that this race is quite as strong as the prior one.
Well, first of all, it could be a 5-horse field.
Okay.
I know Next Level and Awesome Road are coming out, and Tizzy Indy is only possible. I don't see why he would run other than Calumet runs in places like this with horses like this. Anyway, it's going to be a short field. Lat Long does nothing for me. And maybe Can Group is just a better horse, but I really think he's just a turf horse. Ethan Energy, I can't really get there. I liked his last race, but he's not the same class as the top two yet. And I don't think he's going to get there on the day. So it's basically just deciding between the two. And I think, what's your feeling about the prices? I think Nash will be favored again.
I do too. I mean, when I'm making lines like this, I'm looking at the prior race for some clue as to how they're going to bet these horses. And Nash was such a short price that day. I feel like the public will probably go slightly in that direction again. Track Phantom probably should not have been as big a price as he was last
No.
time, but I would imagine that the prices will be close, but I would probably lean towards Nash being the favorite. And I know he's been working well for this race. I saw the most recent workout with Saudi Crown, so I think that could play into it as well.
Yeah, he always works well. He was working well before the last race. And he did stumble. I didn't see it get a mention in the comments. He stumbled at the start. And he's got more speed than he showed. And he'll be closer. But the problem is he's drawn inside Track Phantom, so Track Phantom can shadow his every move. I think Track Phantom might be a better horse, and he's a slightly better price. There's one workout video available. He's had a pretty light schedule since his last race, which totally makes sense. He's been going steady since the beginning of October. 4 races under him, had a hard race. I mean, he ran fast the whole way in the Gun Runner. But I love the way he looked in that work. He might be a pretty good horse. He doesn't have anything like the reputation of Nash, which helps you from a value perspective. And I think he gets the better trip, and I'm siding with him in the Lecomte.
Yeah, it sounds like we're going to agree here. Watching that last race, I was just really taken with the way that Track Phantom was able to shrug off some pretty serious pace pressure. I mean, Next Level was ridden out of the gate like a quarter horse to go after him early, and didn't work out for him. But Track Phantom just kept going and even turned back a strong closing run that Snead put forth that day. And
Snead's pretty good.
Yes, that was a solid field that came out of. And in my opinion, Nash had every chance and just didn't really finish off that race. And that race makes me question Nash's prospects going a little bit longer, moving down the line, because he feels like a horse to me that might take after that dam side a little bit. That is very much they're confirmed like 7 furlong to a mile types. And
yeah, he really wilted at the end of that Gun Runner. I thought he was pretty much done.
And even going back to watch that maiden victory, he looked like a horse that got really comfortable out in front, and then he sort of sprinted away from that field at the end. And I wonder if he's going to be as comfortable using rating tactics, just given that he's another one of these somewhat high-headed types, and he's got he doesn't look like he was traveling as comfortably behind runners in the Gun Runner last time. Maybe he'll be in a better stalking position here, because with some speed coming out, he's probably...
I think they might send him.
I could see that. I mean, I feel like Track Phantom being outside, they'll be content to let that one cross over.
That's the problem with sending Nash, is like you're just playing into Track Phantom then.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation for him, because I think they've got to either go for it from the inside or just make that decision to let the other one cross in front and then press from the outside. But then you do run the risk of letting Track Phantom set some very reasonable fractions. So we'll see how that all plays out. But watching the last race, I just prefer Track Phantom, as I think you do. And he might be the slightly better price. So we'll see how that works out. We should probably just spend a moment on Can Group. I mean, he's got... Watching back the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, I kind of had forgotten how well he ran in that race.
Yeah, he ran really well. He finished fastest. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good effort. And I think he legitimized that Bourbon a little bit. And you could say that his first couple dirt races were over tracks that weren't really kind to horses with his running style at Ellis Park. But for me, I've got trouble getting past the fact that he's a Good Samaritan. And I know Good Samaritan was a versatile horse during his racing career, but when you look up some of the stats for him, he's had a lot more success as a turf sire than a dirt sire. And even though there's dirt on the dam side, to me, just watching him run, he looks like he's a much more fluid mover over the turf.
I agree. And I mean, I understand the connections giving him a shot here. This is the time of year to try it with a horse like this. You're not getting in the way of any major turf races, and you can at least prove to yourselves that you're not missing an opportunity to go down the Triple Crown Trail. So they'll get that out of the way, and maybe he'll surprise me, but I don't see him running back to his turf form.
Well, that brings us to the end of the handicapping of this sequence. Marcus, typically at the end, we just do a recap of how we might play this sequence from a strategy standpoint, which horses we want to emphasize. I mean, just if you just want to give out some horses that if they win during the sequence, you want to be alive to some coverage around them, that would be great. However you want to go about it, just give us a brief recap.
Well, I'm going to be leaning hard in the first leg on Tufani, who's not going to be that short a price to kill the sequence. And I think you have to pick one of two in the last, so I'm just going to go with Track Phantom. I can't see getting more than 2 deep in the Silver Bullet Day, so that leaves 2 other races to try to fool around and try to get a price home in the Colonel Bradley and the Louisiana.
Yeah, and for me, I'm probably going 2 deep in that first leg, maybe using Tufani as an A and the 7 Unbridled Mary is more of a B, because I do think that Tufani is a much more likely winner and a better horse to lean on. Just feel like there could be a little bit of value with Unbridled Mary. In the Silver Bullet Day, that I think the middle legs for me are going to be races within the sequence that I have to look and see how much this ticket is costing before I decide on A's, B's, and C's, because I want to upgrade some long shots, and maybe I'll need to downgrade a few favorites to make it work from a price standpoint. But I mean, the horse I'm looking to upgrade in the Silver Bullet Day would be Perfect Shot. And I'd also want to have some coverage to Miss Code West and West Omaha in the Colonel Bradley. I want to use this horse, the 4 Duke of Carthania.
I have to use him now, because after hearing you make the case for him, and when he wins at 78-1, I
just feel like he's going to be the right price, and I have a somewhat negative opinion on the favorite, Strong Quality. So he's one that I'm definitely going to lean on. And
I mean, my opinion on the race has changed in our conversation. I think you make a good case about Strong Quality. And I definitely wouldn't want to. I mean, he's not like a lone A or anything to me. And once you get past him, and if you don't like beatbox, it's thrown wide open. I mean, I think I would like to get as wide here as possible and hope for an upset.
Yeah, I'm thinking that I would make Duke of Carthania an A, Strong Quality, and beatbox as B's, and then maybe throw in Who Took the Money as a C, because I was kind of almost there and couldn't quite get there, and he'll be a price in this race. But that's kind of how I'm thinking I'll break that one up. In the Louisiana, tough race. I'm kind of leaning towards going 3 deep if I could afford it, with Smile Happy, Saudi Crown, and Confidence Game. Not an ideal way to play, but that's a tricky race to get through. And then in the Lecomte, I mean, we are both down to 2 horses, and I think we both prefer Track Phantom. And if he's a slightly better price, I'm happy to lean on that one.
Yeah, feel the same way.
Well, Marcus, always appreciate your expertise on handicapping fairgrounds, and I really appreciate you on a busy week, as these always are, taking the time out of your day to record this with me.
Well, it was a helpful exercise, and I always like hearing what you have to say about these races, David. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. Hopefully Marcus and I gave out some ideas that you can use when you're constructing your tickets at fairgrounds on Saturday, and I'm hopeful that Craig will be back next week to join me in recapping a lot of the stakes that we discussed on this podcast, as well as other stakes that take place around the country from this upcoming weekend. I do have some confidence that Craig will be back for handicapping the Pegasus World Cup next week, and I know both of us are looking forward to that card. And as I told you at the beginning of this podcast, you want to remember that horse racing's most player-friendly handicapping tournament is the Pegasus World Cup Betting Championship, and that returns on Saturday, January 27th, the day of the Pegasus World Cup. First is seeding the prize pool with $50,000 of their own cash. That is a $6,000 buy-in, with $5,000 going into your live tournament bankroll and $1,000 going to the prizes. That means you have more money at your disposal to rocket to the top of the leaderboard, and with 200 players, that means a $250,000 prize pool. The prizes themselves stand alone. We're talking huge stacks of cash, BCBC seats, NHC seats, and seats to the new and improved Ultimate Betting Challenge. Plus, you can play in the Pegasus World Cup Betting Championship online at ExpressBet or on track at Gulfstream and Santa Anita. Think you've got what it takes? Head over to pwcbc.com for registration and more information. Everybody, I want to thank you for listening to the podcast this week. Remember, you can always catch these TimeformUS podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.